Welcome to The Explainer. About 20 years ago, the invasion of Iraq completely redrew the map of the Middle East. Today, we're going to dig into the source material that unpacks the really profound and lasting consequences of that decision. Okay, so let's jump right in with the core argument from our source. As you can see here, the point is that the 2003 invasion wasn't just another event in a long history. No, it was the pivotal moment. It fundamentally rewired the entire political and social DNA of modern Iraq. So, how did this massive transformation actually happen? Well, we're going to trace that story through 5 key stages. We'll start with the invasion's immediate fallout, then move to the collapse of the state, the rise of foreign influence, see how that affected elections, and finally land on the challenges Iraq is facing right now.
All right, first up, the invasion itself. Let's take a look at the immediate chaos that, according to our source, basically laid the groundwork for every single challenge that would come later. The crucial point our source makes is this. The invasion didn't just change who was in charge, it completely dismantled the entire state. And that created this massive power vacuum. As we're about to see, what rushed in to fill that void wasn't stability. It was chaos and one crisis after another.
So, what did that power vacuum actually look like on the ground for everyday people? Let's examine how our source says the very fabric of Iraqi society just began to unravel. The analysis first points to just the physical destruction. Try to imagine the basics of daily life, just tearing apart. You've got no reliable electricity, no clean water, roads are a mess. And our source notes that even when they tried to start rebuilding, corruption was so rampant that a real recovery felt almost impossible for ordinary people. And of course, this physical collapse led directly to a security collapse. With no state to maintain any kind of order, our source details how all these armed groups, from al-Qaeda to sectarian militias, they just rushed to fill that void. And that's what ignited this brutal civil war, which led to just immense suffering and forced millions of people from their homes. And this, right here, really illustrates the central tragedy of post-invasion Iraq. You have a country sitting on some of the world's largest oil reserves, yet its economy was an absolute wreck. The source points out that security issues just choked off any growth, and that pushed a huge part of the population into poverty. Now, this internal collapse didn't happen in a bubble. It created the perfect opportunity for external powers to step in. And our source focuses specifically on how neighboring Iran began to fill that void. According to the analysis, Iran's strategy was incredibly methodical. You can almost see it here in 3 distinct layers. First, you've got political support for parties that were friendly to them. Second, military backing for armed militias. And third, and this is key, getting control over institutions, embedding its influence deep inside the new Iraqi state. A perfect example of this strategy in action is the Hashd al-Shaabi. The source identifies this group as a major vehicle for Iranian influence. It started out as this loose collection of militias, but then, and this is the wild part, it was eventually integrated into the official state security forces. That gave these groups formal power and legitimacy.
Now, this growing influence didn't just happen in the shadows, and this is where it gets really fascinating, because our source shows how it played out directly in Iraq's democratic process. Yep, right at the ballot box.
The document highlights a really interesting tactical shift, which you can kind of see visualized here. In 2021, Iran's role was very direct, almost like a hand physically moving the chess pieces on the board. But by 2025, with more international pressure, the strategy changed to a more subtle, soft intervention, less of a direct push, and more like a puppet master pulling the strings from a distance. So, what's the crucial point here? It's this. The tactics might have changed, but the results? Not so much. Our source argues that the success of these militia-backed parties in 2025, even with that softer approach, just goes to show how deeply entrenched and effective that influence has really become. Okay, so all of this brings us to the present day. After everything we've just gone over, what does the political landscape in Iraq actually look like right now? And what are the biggest challenges it's facing? This chart from the 2025 elections tells 2 really important stories. First, you see that huge purple section, which shows a majority of power is held by Iran-backed groups. But then, look at that green slice. That's not another political party. That represents the public boycott, a huge number of people who didn't even vote. It's a powerful signal of just widespread disillusionment with the entire system. And so our source concludes by summing up these massive hurdles that Iraq is facing today. It's really this toxic combination you see listed right here. You've got powerful external influence, armed militias operating internally, a public that is just deeply disillusioned, and a political system that seems resistant to any kind of real reform. And so, after 2 decades of turmoil, the analysis leaves us with this huge, fundamental question. With all of these challenges so deeply embedded, the path to a truly stable, sovereign, and prosperous Iraq, well, it remains profoundly uncertain.